Some years back, when I was working as a taxi driver, something terrifying happened to me. It's why I always tell people that taxi driving isn't for everyone. It can be dangerous and unpredictable at times. So I used to do the night shift because it paid better. And to be honest, I've always been a bit of a night owl. You get all kinds of people during those hours. Some drunk, some weird, some just trying to get home after a long day. But this one night was different. It was around 2 a.m. when I got a call for a pickup in this part of town I didn't usually go to. It wasn't necessarily a bad area, just quiet. Too quiet, if that makes sense. The kind of neighborhood where it seems like everyone's asleep and you feel like the only person alive. Anyway, I accepted the fare, thinking it'd be a quick run, maybe someone needing a ride home from work or a bar. I pulled up to this street lined with old houses. They weren't run down, just older. My GPS told me the address, but when I got there, I didn't see anyone. I checked my phone, and the request was still active, so I figured they were running late. I waited, maybe 5-10 minutes, and just as I was about to leave, I saw someone walking toward the car. The guy was tall, maybe in his late 40s, early 50s. He had on this long, dark coat that looked a little out of place for the weather, like too heavy for a warm night. But whatever, people wear weird stuff all the time. He got in the back seat without saying much, just gave me a nod. When I asked where he was headed, he paused for a second before saying an address that was on the edge of town, near some old industrial buildings. Now, I've driven through every corner of this city, and I know that area isn't one people go to at 2 a.m. It's mostly warehouses and factories that shut down years ago. I asked him if he was sure that's where he wanted to go, and he just nodded again. I should have trusted my gut right there and refused the fare, but I didn't. I figured maybe the guy worked security at one of the old buildings, so I started driving, and the whole time, this guy didn't say a word, didn't even look at his phone or out the window, just stared straight ahead through the windshield. After a while, I tried making small talk, asking him how his night was going or if he'd been working late, but he ignored every question. It was starting to feel uncomfortable, like I was driving around a statue. We were getting close to the destination when things got weirder. The streets were deserted, as expected for that part of town, but the further we drove, the more I felt like we were being watched. Not from the buildings, but from the shadows. It sounds crazy, I know, but it was like there were eyes on us, moving along the car, keeping pace with it. I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting the guy to say something or give me some kind of clue as to what was going on. But he just sat there, still as ever. That's when I noticed something odd about him. His coat, which had looked thick before, didn't seem to be moving at all, not even with the motion of the car. It was like he was glued in place, too stiff, like a mannequin. Finally, we arrived at the address he gave me. It was this old, crumbling building, probably abandoned for years. The windows were boarded up, and there were weeds growing out of the cracks in the sidewalk. There were no lights, no signs of life, just this eerie stillness. I turned to him and said, "This is it," expecting him to get out. But he didn't move. He just stared at me through the mirror. And for the first time since he got in the car, he spoke. He said, "Do you know why they call it the dead of night?" I laughed nervously, thinking maybe he was trying to make a joke or break the silence. But he didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. His voice was low, barely above a whisper, but it was enough to make my skin crawl. I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. Then he leaned forward slightly, just enough that I could see his face clearly in the rearview mirror. That's when I realized something was wrong with his face. His expression was strange, and his features seemed off, like something had been altered. I can't really explain it, but I felt a sudden wave of fear, like I needed to get out of there right then and there. But before I could react, he spoke again. "You're not going to leave yet." I froze for a moment. I hadn't said anything about leaving, but he knew. He knew I wanted to get out. I felt this cold pressure on my chest, and my hands started to shake. My mind was screaming at me to move, but my body wouldn't respond. The car felt suffocating, like everything was closing in. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually I forced myself to speak. I told him in a slightly nervous but firm voice that the ride was over and that he needed to get out. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was more like he was amused by something only he understood. Then, without another word, he opened the door and stepped out. As soon as he was out of the car, I didn't hesitate and sped off. I didn't care about him not paying the fare. I just needed to get as far away from that place as possible. But as I sped off, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The man was standing in the middle of the street, watching me drive away. And behind him, in the shadows, I saw several figures, standing perfectly still, all watching me like they were waiting to ambush.